Alrighty guys, I'm gonna hop right into this. No bullshit hooks, any of that. I'm just gonna show you exactly what our closing team did over the last 30 days in March 2024. We had Cameron here, brought in $13,000 in cash, $27,000 in contract value, closed a 36% rate, unique first call to close rate, and a 44% offer to close rate. Sebastian over here brought in $38,296 in cash collected, and also $65,237 in contract value, bringing in over $1,277 per call he takes. He's closing it at a 33% rate, unique offer to close, and a 45% offer to close rate. Got two other guys in this team as closers. Daniel brought in $27,950 in cash, $52,000 in contract value, making a $717 a call, closing at a 21% rate, unique first call to close, and a 36% offer to close rate. Last but not least, we got Jose, another $16,700 in cash, $44K in contract value, bringing in $500 cash per call, and $1,000 in contract value per call, closing at a 19% unique call to close rate and a 24% offer to close rate. For the first few years of my entrepreneurial career, I spent my time running around like a chicken with its head cut off, worrying about delivering service for my clients while also worrying about how to get new deals through the door so we could continue growing as a business. My biggest problem is that for years I was unable to crack the code on how to really take that to the next level and put a team of people in place instead of me that could not only bring deals to the door as efficiently as I could, but actually better. Now, fast forward 7 years and we have an entire sales team in-house here at our company that does all the closing for us. All that I do with them is check in with them on a daily and weekly basis to make sure that they're ready to go, and the rest of the work is done by them. The numbers speak for themselves. This is a team that I meet with once every day for anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes, and they do all the work for the rest of the week. They take all their closing calls, they do all of their follow-up, they use our CRM to make it all happen. And the real magic in this process is not in all the automations and how you set your pipelines up and what CRM you use, but rather in how you build this team and how you train them to close at a 33 to 50% rate without you having to be on the calls with them and checking in on all their sales calls every single day. So today I'm gonna walk you through how we built and scaled a sales team from quite literally zero. It was a completely founder-led sales team, all the way to over $7 million in contract value closed within a 12-month period. Now, this is actually one of the clients that we started servicing in November of 2022. And today we're proud to say that we've done such a damn good job servicing this client that we're now partners in their business. Now, when we first started working with them, one of the biggest limiting beliefs they had is that if the founder and CEO wasn't on each one of the sales calls, there was no way that these sales calls would be closing. The average contract value was pushing over $135,000 per contract. And that was really the biggest hurdle we had to overcome. And we had to change his beliefs by building a team and letting the results speak for themselves. Now, this is a bit of a unique situation because with this partner in specific, they had been in business for over 9 years by the time they ended up signing on with us. And the founder had taken hundreds, if not thousands of sales calls on his own. He had closed tens of deals on his own. And as a result, knew that this had product market fit. He had call recordings of these closing calls, so we were able to use those to train the closers and setters that we brought on board for the sales team. And setting the right foundation like this founder did is probably the most important part about building a successful sales organization. One of the problems that a lot of the partners who come through our program and end up working with us on a done-for-you basis end up facing is they try to offload their sales process way too early. And what I mean by that is they didn't take the right amount of time to set the right foundations, be able to predict accurate numbers for how their sales team would expect to perform, and in return, project proper OTEs, which are on-target earnings, so that they can secure amazing talent that can close not only as good as them, but better than them. So setting this foundation comes down to 3 main factors. Number 1 is closing calls on your own first. One of the rules that we have in-house and for the partners we work with is we don't hire sales teams unless you've already proven product market fit and you have call recordings that we can share with closers so that they understand how you're approaching that sales process for 20 to 40 calls. So a great software to use for this is Fathom. You can check it out. It'll hop into all of your calls for you automatically on Google Meet or Zoom. It will review and transcribe everything you need to know about that call, so that it's super easy for new closers to learn and share when you bring them onto your team. Number 2 is getting to know your metrics. When you get on a call with an experienced closer, an experienced setter, somebody who's gonna be able to close better than you will on these calls, they're gonna wanna know a couple key metrics. How many calls am I booking? Where are my leads coming from? How many calls and appointments do I expect to have on my calendar every day? What's the show rate on those calls? What's your close rate? What's the average contract value? And what's the average cash collected on the front end? The only way you're gonna get to know these metrics is if you, as a business owner, are able to go through that process yourself and get a good feel for significant data. In order to close 20 to 40 deals, you're gonna have to take a couple hundred calls. You're gonna have to set a couple hundred appointments. And with that data, you'll be able to give accurate numbers to the candidates that you're interviewing for your sales organization. Now, once you've closed those deals and you have those metrics in place, it's time to calculate OTE, which is on-target earnings. and then craft an offer. Keep in mind that every single person you bring into your company, you hire for your team, has to be sold just like a customer. They need to know why it's worth their time to work with you as opposed to somebody else, or even better yet, building their own company. And to do that, they're going to need to see significant data. They're going to need to see math that backs that data and leads toward on-target earnings that are actually justifiable, objective, and are aligned with their career goals. So as we talked about, one of the biggest mistakes we see is that people try to hire and build sales organizations way too early in their business's lifetime. And as a result, they end up getting stuck with shitty closers, shitty setters, and just overall shitty talent, and never really end up getting the results that they need in order to retain that talent and build a sales organization capable of bringing in 6 and 7 figures a month in either cash collected or contract value. So if you've taken the time to build the right foundation, you know what your metrics are, there are only really 2 other things required to take your sales team from 0, where you are today, to a 6 and 7 figure a month run rate, whether that's contract value or cash collected. The first is how to properly hire and source sales talent. And the second is how to properly manage and put that sales talent on a growth trajectory that allows you to retain them and put them in the best position to not only produce for you, but more importantly, attain their personal goals and achieve their personal growth targets within their own life. So about a year ago, I was on my way to Mexico, sitting on a plane with my roommate, and I was in the thick of scaling this sales team for a client that ended up closing $7 million in contract value over a 12-month period. And we were struggling with all the things we just talked about. We were struggling with finding good talent, retaining that talent, and then getting that talent to actually perform inside of our sales org without us having to be on calls. And I was recommended a book by another friend of mine called The Sales Acceleration Formula. This is an amazing book. I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. It'll walk you through a lot of the concepts that we talk about in today's video. But this book really was a golden ticket for us to take our sales organization from where we were to a $7 million a year sales organization. The biggest problem we had in our team at the time was a lack of culture. People were not competitive, and there was just really this huge sense of complacency because our compensation models were structured wrong, and we had the wrong people on the team for the job. And we're stuck there pulling our hair out wondering, why are we stuck at a 5 to 10% close rate? Why can't we get to a 15 to 30% close rate? Why are we not able to collect as much cash on the front end as we'd hoped? And wondering if it was the product. But it wasn't the product. In fact, it's almost always the people and the way that you manage those people. So for us, getting back to the drawing board after reading the sales acceleration formula, these are some of the things that we implemented to take our team from where it was to how it ended up producing at the end of the year. Number 1 is knowing where to source your talent from. Now, if you go through a traditional recruiter or recruitment agency, they're going to tell you that LinkedIn outreach is the best way to go. They have this amazing network of people, and they're going to charge you 20% or more of that new hire's on-target earnings for the year. You're going to get absolutely rinsed. And I would not recommend working with a recruiter if you're selling high-ticket products online and trying to build a sales organization to push those products into the market. Instead, I would rely on 3 main sources. The first is Instagram stories. The second are closer or sales groups. These are usually consulting or coaching programs that train up closers and provide a place for them to do role play with other people in the industry. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you here is that if you do make a hire from one of these groups, they've been trained on a specific framework, formula that works on your offer. You don't need to go and try and find another group, stick to that group and continue hiring within it. And the third is internal referrals. This is a super powerful tool that we've used at almost all of our organizations with the sales teams that we've built. People that are high performers inside of your team often know other high performers. And when they can see that the work they're putting in at your organization is paying off, putting big money in their pocket in exchange for great results and hard work, the odds of them being able to refer you to another person that they know well and that performs well are pretty high. So a really great place to start if you're not sure where to find the right closer groups or you don't have an Instagram following to reach out to is just by simply reaching out to the people inside your team that are performing well in sales or outside of sales to see if they know somebody they can refer to you as a candidate. Now, once you've found your hiring candidates, another piece of advice I'll throw out there to do this at scale is if you have Monday or a Google Suite set up for your organization, create a form, include questions and spaces for them to upload things like their CV, previous work experience, to get them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. It will help you scale the number of people you're able to reach out to without having to book meetings with each one of them individually and having to talk to each one of them to get the information. This will help you scale the number of people that can apply for the position you're searching for without having to invest more of your own time. Once you've had those links out for a couple of days, go through, shortlist your favorite candidates, and then set meetings with them using a software like Calendly so that you don't have to manually go back and forth with them to book a time to meet. Once you have interviews set up with your candidates, we use a simple 3-step hiring framework that you can apply to almost any business for any role, but it works exceptionally well for sales and is actually taken right out of the sales acceleration formula book. And the 5 characteristics that we look for are coachability, curiosity, prior success, work ethic, and intelligence. Coachability is super important because it means that that individual will be able to take feedback, implement it quickly, and continue to improve over time. Curiosity is even more important because what is a sales process or a sales call without genuine interest in your prospect and their problems? Prior success is also important because you don't want to be hiring somebody that's a complete green bean. And work ethic obviously is self-explanatory. Last but not least, intelligence. You don't want to be working with a bunch of people that don't know how to use the brains inside of their heads. So how do we test for coachability? Number one is you're going to set up sort of an active interview environment where you can listen to them or watch them complete a task and then provide real-time feedback and then see how quickly they can implement that feedback in a second round. So a great example of this in a sales organization would be a setter hopping on a call or a closer hopping on a call and saying, here's an idea of what an ideal customer looks like for us. I want you to cold call me, qualify me, and try and set me on an appointment with you and your sales team. It doesn't really matter if they're a closer and you're asking them to do a cold call set because a lot of the skills are transferable. What we're really testing for here is how they can take feedback and implement it quickly. Once you listen to them go through one round, you're going to provide them 5 key points of feedback, ranging from something that's super easy to implement all the way down to the 5th thing being something that's a lot harder to implement and will take a little bit more brain power. Immediately after receiving those points, you're going to let them roll, ask them if they're clear on it, and then you're going to run through that same scenario again. As they run through it, check off to see how many of those 5 feedback points they were able to implement in their second time around. If they're able to implement all 5, they've passed with flying colors. Sounds like a great candidate from a coachability perspective. And the less they implement, obviously, the less coachable they are. Number 2 is coachability. This actually starts before the real interview. And we can call this the elevator interview. A lot of you will be doing these meetings over Zoom or over Google Meets, so you won't have a chance to meet them in a lobby and take them up an elevator. But the gist of this is, are they genuinely curious about you as an individual? Do they do their research on your company? Are they interested in about what you guys are doing? Or are they just hopping on the call and waiting for you to lead them into what happens next? So if it's the latter, obviously they're not extremely curious. They're just kind of along for the ride. X, that is not the right person. If it's the former and they're genuinely curious, they hop on the call with you. Hey, what's your name? Where are you calling me from today? What's the weather been like? Oh my God, I love that city. Blah, 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 blah. Sounds a lot more like a curious prospect. The second way to test this is during the role play. So when you're testing them for coachability in a role play or whatever the active component of your interview is, pay attention to see if they're genuinely interested in the questions they're asking you or you as a prospect. You'll be able to get a pretty good feel for this internally. Just trust your gut. Number 3, prior success. What we're looking for here are top 10% performers. Personally, I don't give a fuck if they're a top 10% performer in a sales environment, a sports team, at school. We're looking for trends, top 10% performers in anything that they do. If they don't have much experience in sales, maybe they've only been in the space for a year or they've worked in a small team of less than 10 people and you can't test for this, ask them about if they played any sports. Were they a captain? Were they a top 10% performer on that team? Ask them about school. Were they a top 10% student? Wherever you can test for top 10% performance, you should be looking for that. And honestly, if they're not a top 10% performer, turn them away because it means that they're not competitive. It means that they're not relentless and they don't know what the inputs are required to take them from bottom of the field to a top performer in the field. The other thing I would recommend on this line is get some references. If they're telling you they're a top 10% performer in a sales org, get in contact with the manager of that sales org. If they're telling you they're a top 10% on a sports team, get them to refer you to their coach or their teacher or their professor. Depending on where they're coming from, verify that they were a top 10% performer. If you want to be a top 10% company, you got to be full of top 10% performer. Number 4 is work ethic. And there's 3 ways that I test for this. Number 1 is references. Number 2 is observations during the interview. And number 3 are behavioral questions. My favorite question to ask for behavioral questions is walk me through what a typical Wednesday looks like for you from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, and don't leave anything out. If they're answering and saying, I wake up at 6 a.m., I get right into work, I stop at noon to go work out, I come back, take a shower, get into my afternoon calls, I do role plays, I train, and then I go to bed and finish up and cap the day off by reading a book, is a perfect candidate from a work ethic perspective. They know what inputs are required to get the best possible outputs. If they answer and say, oh yeah, I don't really know, I start at 9 a.m., I usually have breakfast, maybe I walk my dog, maybe I'll hop into work after that, just kind of nonchalantly unsure about what their schedule looks like, not the right person. Reference checks are self-explanatory. Look for the references to verify that they were the hardest work on the team, if not the hardest, then one of the. And then as far as observations made during the interview, pay attention to things like, did they do research on your company before they hopped on? Are they interested or asking questions about how you got started? Or what industry you guys work in, or how your sales organization works. Questions that could only be asked if they had done digging into your background and your company's background. Check-offs on all 3 of those things. Work ethic, thumbs up. Last but not least is intelligence. What we're looking for here is somebody's ability to take complex information, process it, and then communicate it simply in a way that somebody who's 4, 5, 6 years old could understand in a very short period of time. This is super important for candidates because it means that they'll be able to identify patterns in sales calls, complex problems, and come up with simple solutions that will have outsized returns in the back end. So a way that we typically work this into our training process is we break it down into 2 calls. So we actually test for this on interview 2. So we just walk through everything that we do on interview 1 to test for the first 4 traits and characteristics. To get this last one, in between call 1 and 2, we'll send them a piece of super complex information, maybe some details about product technicals or a really in-depth script, and we'll make sure to send this to them within 1 to 2 hours before call 2. No earlier, no later, so they have enough time to consume it, break it down in their own heads, understand it, and then show up to the call with you and be able to either reiterate it in an active interview environment, so you can give them an activity related to what you send them, or be able to answer questions that you ask them based on that subject on the call. Super key here is make sure you don't send this information to them too early, because remember, we're testing for how fast they can consume complex information, process it, and then communicate it clearly. Now, with all that information, you're gonna have a couple candidates that really stick out. What you're gonna do is rank them on a scale of 1 to 5 for each one of those 5 characteristics. The highest scoring candidates out of 25 are gonna be the ones that you want to bring on to build your sales organization around. Once you made your decisions, you have the right sales reps on board. Maybe this is your first time building a sales organization, maybe it's your closer or setter, or maybe you've been around the rodeo a couple times and this isn't your first closer or setter, you're adding them to a team of existing people. Either way, you're gonna have to train this new talent so they can hit the ground running and start putting money in your bank account without you having to close. So what does this training process look like for us? There's 2 different training cadences that we put our teams on. The first is the onboarding cadence, and the second is the maintenance cadence, or what they do on a day-to-day, week-to-week once they've been fully onboarded. For the initial onboarding, we'll get them to listen to all the closing calls that you took as a business owner, and maybe also some of the closing calls that some of your top performing sales reps have had. Once they've gone through 20 to 40 of those calls, they've taken notes and have a good sense of the call cadence and also the sales process. You're gonna ask them to do a role play with somebody internal to your team. So you can have them start doing this by role playing with another team member, maybe another closer, but I would highly recommend they do it with you as a sales leader or the business owner, because you don't want them to pick up any bad habits from anybody else on the team. Once they're able to sell you using what they've learned from the calls they've listened to, you're gonna start booking them on your sales calendars on low volume. So if a full-time closer is taking 3 to 5 calls a day, maybe 8 calls a day, you're gonna put them on 25 to 50% of the call volume of a full-time closer. Now, before you start booking them on a full-time schedule, you're gonna be looking for them to hit the same KPIs that the average of the rest of your team is hitting. So if you have a 33% average close rate, we're not gonna start booking them full-time until they hit a 33% average close rate on low volume. In order to get them there, what you're gonna do as a sales leader or a business owner is listen to every single call that they take, have a stand-up with them in the morning where you chat about things that they can focus on for the day, and then have a stand-up with them at night at the end of each day where you can review those calls with them and do active role play in the places that they need to improve. This is the fastest way to get a closer or a setter or anybody else you're hiring for your sales organization from an absolute green bean newbie to somebody who can close at standard, if not perform at the highest level inside of your organization. This could take 10 days, it could take 30, it could take 60. Put the time in, make the extra effort in the front end so that you don't end up getting bogged down later. Now, once they've achieved those average metrics, you're gonna move them onto a full-time schedule, the same as the rest of the team, and make sure they're able to maintain those metrics. This brings us to the end of our training cadence, and now we're moving into the maintenance cadence. So what does it look like on a month-to-month and a week-to-week basis for closers, setters, anybody at your sales organization to continue training and getting better every single day? The first thing you're going to do is incentivize the team to work together. Structure your compensation, structure your leaderboards in a way that doesn't force people apart from one another to compete and hide information, but rather in a way that allows them to share information and incentivizes them to review calls together, do role plays, and continue growing and sharing that tribal knowledge between each person in the organization. Your team should be training every single day together if they're not on calls. So if they're not doing follow-up, if they're not on calls, make sure they're communicating in Slack, sending each other Calendly links, role-playing, asking for call feedback. If they're not, find a way to adjust your compensation or your incentive structures or your culture to incentivize them to do that. Number 2, and the highest leverage thing you can do as a sales leader for regular training cadence is listening to call recordings and doing it live. So this looks like I'm gonna take a Fathom recording of our best and our worst call from a specific time period. I'll get that closer on the phone with me. We'll screen share, we'll listen to it, and every time there's a thing that we can improve, we'll pause it, we'll give them live feedback, and we'll be brutally honest with them. Hey, that was shit. You didn't bring enough energy at the beginning of the call, and then we'll get them to role play until they can get a sense of what they should be doing with you live on the call. This is something that is ideally done on a weekly basis. You won't have enough time to do it every single day. If you can, try and do it as often as possible because it does have the biggest payoff in terms of improvement with your team. The other thing I would recommend is setting up a daily stand-up that's early in the morning, gets the team face-to-face, and shows shows that they're prepared for the day. Make cameras on mandatory, make full work attire mandatory. People shouldn't be taking these calls in bed shirtless. Cameras on, ready to take role plays on the call. On these calls, you'll be going over everything from role plays to ways to improve the sales process overall, call reviews, setters talking with closers on how to better qualify leads, the whole 9 yards. This is going to help the team feel like a team and also improve together. The last thing I'll say on this note is set the call times early. If you can, set it at 5, 6 a.m. That's when top performers wake up. That's when the sales day should start. It should be dialing before people get to work, and it should be dialing until people get home and before they start dinner. So once we've done all of that, we have now reached the bare minimum required to run a top 1% sales organization. Next challenge is getting your team from where they're currently at to being able to self-actualize. If you've ever seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is exactly what we're talking about. Taking them from the bottom, which is meeting their bare minimum requirements for living standards, all the way to the top to where they can start thinking about ways to improve their impact on themselves, the world around them, and on the team they're functioning on, so they can be the highest performing version of themselves and make the biggest impact on the world around them. There are 5 main benefits to this. The first is retention. You'll be able to retain talent for a long time because they will understand that you are the best team and the best place for them to be spending their time and money with. Number 2 is competition. Team members will be incentivized to relentlessly compete with one another because they won't feel like they're deserving of the spot they're in, but will instead feel like they have to work for it on a day-to-day basis. Number 4 is consistency. They'll show up every day on time, ideally early, because they won't feel like work is a task. It'll feel like it's their calling. It's aligned with their mission and where they want to be in their future and the rest of their life. And last but not least, they'll be self-starting. Ideally, your team is constantly iterating processes, constantly improving scripts, coming up with new ideas on how to improve their performance as a whole, and working together to do so that you, as a leader, don't have to be the only catalyst for improvement on your team. Now, there are 3 main tools we use to achieve this. The first are the stand-ups we talked about, the 5:30 a.m. stand-ups. The second are growth and performance reviews. And the third are dynamic management systems. So for these growth and performance reviews, we will set up 15-minute meetings one-on-one with every single person on our team. We like to call these MTO3s. It stands for Management Tools One-on-One. And inside of these meetings, we'll do a number of things. We'll talk about work performance, work satisfaction, feedback for us as a team, as leaders, feedback for the team member as a participant on the team, as well as life satisfaction. Every month, we'll start by doing a full growth and performance review. During these reviews, we'll go through everything we just talked about. And then in the 3 weeks in between, we'll still have our 15-minute one-on-one growth and performance reviews. But these meetings are more to make sure that they're on track for the KPIs they set. They have time to have open discourse with their leaders, talking about feedback, and really provide a foundation for leaders and management to get to know their team on a personal level. The next thing are dynamic management systems. These have been some of the biggest catalysts for us in terms of taking performance from the bare minimum standard to a top 1% performing sales organization. The 2 levers we pull for dynamic management systems are number 1, a Wild West pipeline, and number 2, dynamic position. So for the Wild West pipeline, the way this works is, let's say I'm a closer, I take a showed call, and that call doesn't close. Maybe I have them scheduled for a follow-up, or they're in a cadence, whatever the situation might be. Our CRM is set up in a way where if a closer has spoken to somebody for the first time and hasn't gotten them across the line within the next 2 weeks, it automatically takes that lead off their pipeline and moves them into a shared public first come, first serve pipeline, which we call the Wild West pipeline. Other closers have the ability to get in there, call that lead, and bring them onto their own pipeline and have a shot at closing them for the next 2 weeks. What this will help you do is prevent the problem of leads getting put onto pipelines and having those pipelines stagnate, meaning that people are followed up with and then just forgotten about because they've ghosted a closer. And number 2, losing out on deals because you have the wrong person speaking with them. A lot of the time, it's not the product, it's just the person they're speaking with. Leads and opportunities don't close because they feel like the person that's selling to them or that's chatting with them on how to solve their problems doesn't understand them. So by moving them into a Wild West pipeline after 2 weeks, they have an opportunity to speak with a new individual that might have a better chance at getting them across the line. Now, dynamic positions is super fun. This is a way to incentivize your team to work together, to consistently improve, as well as make sure that everybody in that team doesn't feel like they deserve the position they're in and that they have to earn it every single day. So the way this works is we have leaderboarding systems with KPIs. The 2 KPIs we track for our closers are cash per call, or average appointment value, and close rate. To be honest, I don't really care for close rate. I care a lot more for average appointment value. If you're getting on a call and you're closing at a 30% rate, but your average appointment value is $1,000, and a guy who's closing at a 15% rate has an average appointment value of $2,000, the close rate can be misleading. You can do that by dividing the total cash that a closer collects by the number of unique first appointments that showed in order to get them to that point. The 2 key metrics we track for setters are number of appointments booked and also the set rate. So based on the unique calls they make, how many of those calls that pick up are actually getting set. Now we stack rank the performance of our teams on public leaderboards so that everybody can see. Every month, if somebody is underperforming, let's say the team is closing at an average 33% rate, we've got a closer performing at a 15% rate, we'll take that closer, move them into the setting team, and potentially move the top performer from the setting team into the closing team. Not only will this help you incentivize performance and relentless competition, it'll also do wonders for your team. Sometimes a closer might just be having a bad month or a bad 2 months, and they might be struggling. Most closer roles are full performance, and if you're closing at a 15% rate, you're probably not making very good money. Some setter roles might have a base plus performance compensation package. So moving a closer that's having a shitty month into a setting team with a base plus performance model could be the best thing you could do for them, because it might just give them the chance to sit on their heels for a little bit, get their bearings again, and get back to their old high-performing self. Now, the other thing you can do for these dynamic management systems is constantly cutting the bottom 20 to 30%. This will depend on how big your team is, but this can be done on a monthly, bi-monthly, or a quarterly basis. Maybe it's every 6 months. But the objective here is to keep things interesting, make sure that people are feeling like they do not deserve their positions in the team, but they have to earn it every single day, and also allow you to remove lower performers, which will drag your entire team down, and have an opportunity to replace them with higher performing individuals, which will push your team up in terms of performance. Now that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you've got more value than the length of this video times 10. And if you're facing any of these problems with your sales organizations, or maybe I didn't cover them, drop a comment below. Let me know exactly what that problem is, and I'll be sure to take the time to get back to you personally.